with human rights organization Solidarity U.S. on the case of a Muslim in the United States who is allegedly wanted by the FBI in connection with last week's attacks. It runs about an hour.
He's here. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are very sorry for starting late. We are waiting for our lead attorney, Mr. Stanley Cohen from New York. He's here and he's joining us in a minute. My name is Abdurahman Alamoudi with Solidarity U.S. We started this task force to help the Muslim community with the pressure and the problems that we have from backlash and government, FBI, and so on. It's my honor to introduce our panel here. To my immediate right is Dr. Yaser Bushnaq, President of Solidarity US and President of Solidarity International. Second to him is Imam Motaz al-Hallak. And third is Mr. Mahdi Bray with the Coordinating Council of Islamic Centers and Masajids in Washington, D.C. And fourth is Mr. Stanley Cohen. I know that we have been keeping you here for long. We will give each panelist 2 minutes and then we'll start with your questions, and I start with Dr. Yaser Bushnaq, our President.
Good morning. Let me tell you first a little bit about Solidarity US. And I want to say in this regard that as American Muslims and within our collective capacity and professional experience, especially in the area of human rights and civil rights and so forth, and out of our moral obligation to assist law enforcement in pursuing their duties within the boundaries of the law, to make sure that the due process has been pursued in a legal and moral and ethical way. We came up with this Solidarity US to ensure that first, and second, to make sure that the very basic and fundamental civil and human rights of the Muslims and Arabs are not violated and not abused. In addition to that, let me reiterate what I said last Tuesday in that regard, that it is the moral obligation of every Muslim and Arab and otherwise to come forward and cooperate with the law enforcement and to assist them in pursuing the perpetrators of these savage attacks against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. However, after closely watching what we refer to as intrusive tactics committed by the FBI against Muslims and Arabs and against places of worship, because of that, we are taking this position and given this advice to all Muslims and Arabs, that we advise them not to talk and to speak to the FBI except with the presence of a legal counsel, and also to remind them that they have the full right not to speak to the FBI if they elected to do so. This is their constitutional right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Yaser Bushnaq. I will present Mr. Mahdi Bray to talk about the community and masajid and Islamic centers. Mahdi.
Good morning and thank you for coming. I think that as a coordinator or for the Coordinating Council of Muslim Organizations, which consists of a collective of mosque and Muslim organizations here in the greater Washington, D.C. area, extending as far as Richmond, Virginia, and Baltimore, One of the concerns that we have is a concern, first of all, as we're all concerned about, is national security, the safety of our nation. Global terrorism is indeed a great problem. We used to think that it only involved maybe over in Ireland or Sri Lanka or in the Middle East or in parts of Africa, and that it couldn't happen here. Well, folks, it did. It's here. So therefore, we're as concerned as anyone else as Americans for the safety of our country. We want to make sure that our country is protected from enemies, whether it be domestic or foreign. Make no doubt about it. It's clear. And that is the position of all of our mosques and all of our Muslim organizations here within the area. Having said that, however, we have a dilemma that we've always had in America. It's nothing new, and that is the context of what we sometimes say in the Quran. There's a word called mizan. It means balance. How do you balance the nation's security against that of civil liberties and civil rights? It's always been a problem. Abraham Lincoln had that problem during the Civil War when he suspended habeas corpus. We had that problem in the early 20s when we dealt with the Palmer raids that they basically gave a blank check to law enforcement to take away the civil liberties of immigrants from Italian and Irish descent. We had the problem during the 60s with the civil rights and the anti-war movement with COINTELPRO. Church hearings bear that out, that basically our government actually tried to stifle free speech. So it's a problem. And it's a problem we have to come to grips with every time we're in a national crisis. And it's a problem now. Because yes, we need to be safe. Yes, we need to protect our nation against enemies, whether they be here or abroad. But we should not do it at the expense of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We cannot do it because that's our greatest security. That's our greatest freedom. And so we're concerned that perhaps there's some overarching, a broad net being cast. Certainly there was a broad net being cast against the Imam who's here with you today. Imam al-Hallak certainly was, in my opinion, vilified. There was a rush to judgment, misinformation somewhere. Somebody said he was in Mexico with 8 other persons. He never left his home here in Maryland. So it's this type of situation. Same thing that happened when the Oklahoma city bombing, when you had a person of Arab descent and a Muslim being kept in Heathrow Airport, when we found out that actually there was Timothy Bray that had done the dastardly deed. So we have to be careful, and we have to make sure that in our quest for justice, in our quest for bringing these corporate criminals to justice, that we don't do it at the expense of the innocent. And that's what we're concerned about in the Muslim community. We're facing a backlash in our masjids. Fairfax County Police has told us there's a group now out in Fairfax you call the police department. They're on the internet. They call themselves America for America by Americans, who are threatened to attack mosques and Muslims and Muslim schools. I thought, well, maybe they've moved the alphabets up. They've gone from the KKK to the AAA. But nevertheless, it's a problem. So I would hope that in this time of peril and these time of crisis, that once again, that we don't rush to judgment, and that cool heads will prevail, and that we don't sacrifice our Bill of Rights, our civil liberties and civil rights in the hysteria of trying to find the culprits of this horrible and dastardly deed that was done to our nation. Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our lead attorney, Mr. Stanley Cohen.
Let me apologize for being the cause of the delay this morning. It seems that Washington traffic is worse than New York traffic. My words are going to be brief. Preliminarily, what I'm about to say, my view does not necessarily reflect the view of any Muslim organizations, any Muslims, anyone other than myself today, although I feel, based upon my discussions over the last several days, what I'm about to say probably represents the sentiments of millions of Muslims who feel that they're under siege right now, and certainly hundreds of millions of progressive thinking North Americans who are starting to dig in and say, well, this was horrible, but we need not rush to judgment. I'm not going to detail the position that the community feels are the wise about why they're under attack. We spoke about that day. Unfortunately, increasingly the media is now singling out a growing pattern of harassment, of intimidation, of raids on mosques, on following people. Needless to say, we don't need more laws. We need laws that are enforced fairly and equally. We have more laws than we know what to do with right now. We don't need to give law enforcement more power and authority. We just need to have professional and responsible law enforcement, and they can do what must be done. I said this the other day, and I'll repeat it again, and it would appear that while the elected officials in this country are attempting to some degree to douse the flames of passion and prejudice, law enforcement all too often is pouring gasoline on the fire. Preliminarily, there's been a lot of discussion about why Imam Motaz al-Hallak refused to meet with the FBI, and he did not, contrary to some of the reports in the media, meet with the FBI yesterday. Very simply put, the FBI for a number of years, in his opinion, and we've been able to document this, has harassed himself and the Muslim community in Texas, has infiltrated the mosque, has created a tremendous amount of anti-Muslim sentiment in various parts of the country. And as a result of that, and as a result of the fact that he knows he need not meet with the FBI, he elected not to. Nevertheless, for almost a week, he invited representatives of the Justice Department, namely U.S. attorneys, to sit down with him. He's been waiting, not in Mexico, for a subpoena which has never come to his house. There has been, to some degree, a campaign that's been orchestrated by the media with regard to Motaz al-Hallak, and unfortunately some in the media, and I know it's a difficult job, Lord knows lawyers are attacked, so I'll take my pot shot right now, have basically unwittingly or wittingly become complicit in that. The names Richard Jewell and Wenho Lee should resonate in the memory of media. It was, after all, the FBI which leaked stories, which pushed stories concerning these two gentlemen, but it was the media which acted as the drum major in the crucifixion of those two people whose lives were wrongfully destroyed. 2 years ago, my client responded to and at that time he refused to talk to FBI as well. He responded to not one, not two, but 3 separate invitations, no subpoenas, to appear in front of a grand jury in New York City. He appeared. He was provided a grant of immunity, which is important. Stop and think. Would the government grant immunity to an individual that they believed was involved in bombings and mayhem and murder and terrorism elsewhere? No, of course not. On occasion, they've granted immunity when they've called them as witnesses at trials. He was not called as a witness at any trial. Most, if not all, of the inferences, innuendos, and allegations about my client, which have been leaked or dug up, dredged up by the media with the help of the FBI in the last few days, relate to what was investigated fully and thoroughly 2 years ago at a time when my client was vindicated. He was not arrested. He was not prosecuted. He was not charged. The government didn't even believe that he had a sufficient or any nexus with that investigation, sufficient enough to call him to trial. So while everyone seems to be running around and talking about 2 or 3 years ago, it's history. It's done. It's over. Yesterday we did meet after a week of requesting, begging prosecutors in Texas, Baltimore, and finally in Washington that we be provided with an opportunity to sit down and talk with not the FBI, but prosecutors. We met for approximately 3 hours yesterday. The lead prosecutor that we met with yesterday is a gentleman named Patrick Fitzgerald, who I've known for many years, who was formerly with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, is now the acting U.S. Attorney in Illinois, is the U.S. Attorney that presented my client to the grand jury in New York. So this wasn't an inquiry by a novice. This is someone who knows what the cases are about. This is the lead prosecutor in the last 2 quote-unquote terrorism trials in Manhattan. We met for 3 hours. My client answered every single question which was asked of him. He was not provided a grant of immunity. He was not promised any immunity. He didn't invoke his rights, his Fifth Amendment rights, as we call them. Probably during the course of 3 hours, my client asked to speak with me in private, as is his right, maybe 3 times because he didn't understand the question. This was a collegial meeting. It was not adversarial. It was not confrontational. It was not necessarily tense. What I find most interesting about it is while the FBI was so quick to point the finger at Motaz al-Hallak as being a suspect, possibly, a fugitive, possibly, as leading, what was it, the dissident cleric from Syria, leading his band of terrorists, one newspaper talked about, on a path across Mexico with the Mexican army following him. Well, he sat down and spoke with these persons. 95% of the questions asked of him, as I've suggested for a week, had absolutely nothing to do with the tragedy of last week. 95% of the questions asked of him were very general questions that dealt with persons and organizations throughout the world, that dealt with situations in communities throughout the United States, very little of which he had any knowledge, information, or idea about. It is for that reason that we stated from the first day that we thought this was a fishing expedition of sorts. And it is for that reason that I've received literally dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of calls over the last few days where Muslim activists and leaders and just everyday good Muslim citizens have said, you know, they're not asking me about what I know or don't know about what occurred last week. They're asking me about my community. They're asking me about where do I travel? Who do I see? Where do I get my money from? It's that type of inquiry, that type of sweeping, some would use the word inquisition, that while many Americans say give the Federal Bureau of Investigation all the latitude they want to pursue this, that has alarmed Muslims and non-Muslims alike in this country, that it's being used as a pretext not only to fish, but to spy. There were questions asked, in particular, about the horrors of last week. My client was shown approximately 19 photographs of persons who are alleged to have been involved, the quote-unquote hijackers. He was asked if he knows any of them. The answer was no. He's asked if he's seen any of them. The answer is no. The answer was he was asked, has he helped any of them? No. The question was he asked if he had any idea, knowledge, information that this was going to occur? The answer was no. In fact, on a couple of occasions, and I thank Mr. Fitzgerald because I thought he brought good faith to the table as opposed to the FBI, he said, look, if there's anything you can do in any way, in any shape, in any form to help us, please do. And my client said he would. At the end of the meeting, my client was not arrested. He was not handed a subpoena. In fact, he was asked if he can think of anything else, if he has any other information, if he could be of help in the community, of urging people to come forward to please do so. And he has, and he will. He has in the past week or so spoken out to friends in the community saying, look, this is a horrible event. We are obligated to help. We are not obligated to be intimidated. Now, there are those in the community who wish to talk to the FBI. That's their choice. There are those in the community who do not. That, too, is their right. As was announced a few moments ago, individuals do not have to talk to the FBI, and if they do, they are entitled to have lawyers with them. Now, I have the bad news for you. No one is particularly here to be a captive in my audience today. People are certainly here, and they want to ask questions of Motaz al-Hallak. Because my client does not want to interfere with an ongoing investigation that he wishes well, because my client does not want to in any way compromise an investigation that is ongoing which he wishes well, and on the basis of hopefully the sage wisdom of his long-standing lawyer, myself, I have instructed him that he will not answer any questions whatsoever about substance, subject matter, or even process yesterday. He will not answer any questions about the discussions relative to 2 years ago or the allegations pertaining 2 years ago. Allegations is not quite the appropriate word, the character assassination of 2 years ago. Again, because he wants to help this country. He is a U.S. citizen, and I don't distinguish citizens from non-citizens, but he has a family. He wishes America well. He's part of the American mosaic. Some in the FBI have forgotten that. He's going to read a statement to you. He will answer some questions that touch upon his feelings, his concerns, his hopes. I know as gifted and persuasive and challenged and professional journalist, you're not going to take no for an answer. You're going to push, and you're going to prod, and you're going to be very gifted. You'll be almost athletic in your skills. But whenever the question comes down to the area that is taboo, I'm going to stand up and say no comment. If you want to bully anyone or beat up anyone in the media, please do me. I would not like to see a situation where pointed, suggestive questions are asked, like good cross-examiners that trial lawyers are, and when my client says I won't answer, the comment in the newspaper is, when asked, do you know Osama bin Laden, the man said no comment or refused to answer. I mean, that is a question that is pregnant with a decision or a determination that's unsupported by fact. So, with no further ado, I'm going to sit down. My client is going to read a statement to you. We are available for some questions subject to the four corners that I've put out there today. Thank you.
Good morning. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most gracious. It is only God, and God alone, who knows the depth of the sorrow and the gravity of the pain that I feel because of the tragic and criminal events of the September the 11th. I join my voice with the voice of the whole world in condemning those vicious and cowardly acts of terrorism. There is no excuse, there is no justification, there is no good cause, there is no reason whatsoever that could ever justify those horrible acts. Hundreds of millions of Muslims mourn this crime, as do my family and me. I am a U.S. citizen, I am a family man, I love this country, I love its people, and I care very much for their well-being. I have always tried to follow the laws of this land. The laws of Islam absolutely prohibit those vicious acts. Those responsible must be tracked down and must be brought to justice. In spite of some rumors which suggested otherwise, I immediately made myself available to the prosecutors and to the grand jury. And yesterday, as my attorney just said, we met with the prosecutors and I answered all their questions. And I will help them in any way that I can. I only ask that my family and I be treated with dignity and respect and be allowed to go on with our lives just the way all Americans are entitled. Thank you.
Yes, please identify yourself.
I have two questions. One, it was mentioned earlier, I believe, by the second speaker, where the FBI had violated the sanctity of some mosques, and if you could be specific about that. And the other one, sir, is addressed to you, and why do you think you're still out? Why do you think the FBI is not essentially served you with a warrant for your arrest? Why do you still think you're here today?
Well, that's a legal conclusion, but I think it speaks for itself. While there are some 175 to 200 people that are in custody that have been arrested, and while apparently 125 subpoenas have been issued, the fact that my client is standing in front of you today, and the fact that he's not been served with the subpoena speaks volumes. Quite simply, he's done nothing wrong, and he has no information. He's not withholding any information from the case.
Okay, and the second point...
That's...
There have been several incidents, but I can give you one local, since basically I represent a regional organization that deals with mosques in the area. And that's one in a mosque in Silver Spring, whereby the FBI actually came and wanted to show photos during the Friday worship period. Now, fellas, I mean, would you go to a church or a synagogue and want to disrupt services during that particular time? I mean, there's something about that that just says that maybe there needs to be some cultural sensitivity training or some religious sensitivity training within the Bureau. You just don't do that. And the Imam was willing to have them there and something like that, but not during the middle of Friday prayer. And so when he refused to do it, then their way of responding with it was to do a stakeout and do something like you saw in the Godfather, where they're going to take license plate numbers. And remember the wedding where everybody starts taking the license plate numbers and this kind of stuff, you know. I mean, so it basically was what I call a Playhouse 90 type of move, you know, basically that took place at the masjid. And that's intimidating and it's not fair, you know, and we expect better of our law enforcement. You know, we support the FBI, but we expect better. We expect better.
Let me just add with respect to that, excuse me.
Yeah, sure.
There was at least one other incident that was brought to my attention where not only did the FBI show up at a mosque during the middle of services and say that they really should be permitted with an opportunity with a slide projector to show photos, and not only did they then, when they were rejected, go outside and take the license plates down of all the people that had been there, they then went to their homes at various times of that night and said, again with this divisive attitude, well, your leaders don't want to be good Americans and they don't want to let us in to speak with you. We know you're good Americans. That's why we've come to your homes at 10, 11, and midnight. That doesn't happen in St. Patty's and it doesn't happen in a local synagogue.
Yes. My name is al-Hallak from Al Jazeera TV. Just to make it clear, we understand you have done a lot of good for the Muslim community in Arlington, Texas. You established a mosque, you established a school. One question, I don't know if you can answer it. You have a lot of religious activity. Do you have any political activities? And what sort of harassment you've been suffering over the last 2 years from the FBI?
I don't have any political activities. I'm focused on my mission, and my mission is mostly revolve around education, Islamic education, establishing Islamic schools, supporting Islamic schools. And the past week was very hard on me and on my family. I lived in fear while I was traveling from Texas, knowing that the rumors are there that I'm running away, or I'm in Mexico, or I'm fugitive. And immediately I talked to my lawyer and told him, listen, I'm here, I'm available, and but I don't want to talk to the FBI because they were not fair with me. I know that the FBI faces a huge and a very difficult task, but at the same time I have a very unpleasant experience with them. I know that they assassinated my character. They harassed the community in Arlington and North Texas, and since it is my right not to talk to them, and I make it clear for him that I'll talk to any other officials, and I did. So it's been hard, and we don't want it. We already have a very tragic situation. We have a calamity that is beyond description. We don't want to increase that. We don't want to add more innocent people and innocent victims to the already very high number of victims. So it's been hard, and I hope things will be better and things will be clear.
Let me if I may, just one point I want to add in that regard. Unlike a grand jury subpoena, where a citizen or non-citizen is compelled to appear, he was not compelled to appear with the U.S. Attorney yesterday. He elected to do that voluntarily.
Mr. al-Hallak, writing for the local newspapers in Washington, one thing that we've had difficulty, just simple fact establishing, can you tell us where it is that you work now and where you are teaching now in the Washington area and in Southern Maryland?
Yeah, he's not going to identify by name the place of his employment for one very simple reason. They have already, those of you who have been out here, I guess, and a little bit older, perhaps my age, have been doing this for years and years and years. We're able to figure it out, and the place has been inundated with media. There are kids there. There are people that want to be left alone. It's very coercive. And so, suffice it to say, he's worked here, he works here, and he works in an academy. It's a Muslim or an Islamic academy, but he's not going to identify it by name, address, phone number, or social security number.
I'm from CNN. There are some connections that have been made between you, bin Laden, and groups. Money given to someone actually convicted in embassy bombings, that you've been in Texas. Are they simply really mere coincidences?
Those allegations were investigated fully by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the federal grand jury in the Southern District of New York 2.5 to 3 years ago. Suffice it to say, given the depth, the breadth, and the numbers of prosecutions with regard to World Trade Center 1, for lack of a better word, World Trade Center 2, the double bombings, the embassies in Africa, let me ask you a question. Do you believe that if there was any evidence connecting him to any criminal wrongdoing over the last 7 years that he'd be standing here right now?
Well, is it really a coincidence that in a case like this, he was one of the first people that the authorities came to talk to?
No, the authorities did not come to talk to him at all. The authorities held a press conference and announced that they wanted, quote, to speak to him, and they feared he was missing. They had his phone number. They had my phone number. They wouldn't do that to you. They wouldn't do that to me. I dare you to point out one other example in recent jurisprudence history where the FBI has held a press conference without reaching out to a person while they knew where he was and announced by identity the person's name and accused, if not, well, inferred, if not accused him of a horrible crime. It is in the backdrop of that, and it is in the backdrop of Richard Jewell. I hate pressing Mr. Jewell, and I hate pressing the other individuals. A month ago, the entire United States was saying, what's wrong with this FBI? They're screwing up cases, pardon my language. They're wrongfully charging people with crimes. Evidence is being stolen. Agents are being arrested. They are literally an organization in disarray. You want to know why now that same institution singled out my client? I think recent history speaks for that. Next.
Hi, Gary Reels, WUSA. Would Mr. al-Hallak please describe for us what knowledge and relationship he has to Osama, and secondly, if he thinks Osama should be turned over?
Well, he has no relationship to Mr. bin Laden. Zero, none, nil, never has, never will. With regard to what he believes should happen to Mr. bin Laden, I think he made it clear. If there is evidence under international law and under U.S. law sufficient enough to result in his being arrested, prosecuted, tried, and a penalty imposed, it should occur.
Could he speak to that?
I agree with it.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cohen, are you representing any
Can
of
you
the...
tell us who you are?
I'm sorry, with the Baltimore Sun. Are you representing any of the other INS detainees that are being held?
No.
Have you talked with attorneys who are? Do you know? Have you heard even whether attorneys are meeting with these people?
No. You see, that's part of the problem as well. This may come as a shock to you, but under INS law, people that are being detained are not entitled to attorneys. If they're able to afford an attorney, they can get one, but they are not, as a matter of law, entitled to one. With regard to, I believe there have been 2 criminal arrests. If they cannot afford an attorney, they're entitled to a court-appointed attorney. I have no idea who he or she may be for either attorney. I've not reached out to them. I think what you're seeing is hundreds of people, interestingly enough, who, quote, are taken into custody. They don't understand that they don't have to go with the FBI. They're being denied lawyers. They're being held incommunicado. And lots of folks are asking the question and not getting the answer.
Can I make just one statement there? Solidarity US is putting a network of lawyers around the country. So if anybody has any problem with any legal issues, he can call Solidarity US or email us or anything like that, and we will help the community. Muhammad Haqqi.
Muhammad Haqqi, I write for Al-Ahram Weekly and a number of other Arab newspapers. There are some writings out there and even documentaries like Jihad in America and Steve Emerson and others who are saying that the mosques in America are propagating a message not only of fundamentalist Islam but a message of hate. In your experience, have you ever met in any of the mosques that you frequented a message of hate?
From my experience, I can say comfortably that 99.9% of the Muslims who are here, they are here to stay. They are here and calling this country as home. They are here to share with the American people the best of what they have and to benefit and also to enjoy the best of what America is all about. So they are here to build institutions. They are here to enjoy the freedom of movement and freedom of expressing their opinions.
In your opinion, sir, why do you think fundamentalist Muslims would perhaps attack the United States? Do you have any opinions on that?
Can I just, I'm not going to, I think it's important to remember one thing. People are using words like fundamentalist and Islamist all too free. Now, it's been my pleasure to represent Muslims throughout the world literally for more than a decade. I saw pictures of some of the individuals charged with this horrible crime who the night before were sitting in a bar, getting drunk, paying strippers, and were lounging in swimming pools with women in previous weeks. I know of no Muslims, certainly quote-unquote fundamentalists, that would engage in such outrageous conduct. I think we have to be careful between accusing persons who happen to be Muslim or that projected as Muslim with representing the Quran or any Quranic teaching or faith.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Matthew South, Washington Times. Mr. al-Hallak, you came to Washington, Maryland, about a year ago, from what I understand. There have been reports in the weeks leading up to the hijackings that several of the people who were on the FBI's lists had made Laurel their base, not too far from where you are. First question, what brought you to Maryland? And second question, is there anything about the Laurel community that you can see as an imam, as a leader, that might have drawn people to make that their base?
I'll deal with the second question first. Certainly he'll answer why he came here. There, you know, number one is there are suggestions and there are allegations and there's disinformation pertaining to, quote, Muslims who were involved in this that are in the area. I don't know if that's true, number one. I don't hear those questions when a bombing is initiated by the IRA in London about the Irish community in Boston, where there are IRA persons who have been seen and arrested. I don't hear that in Williamsburg in Brooklyn, when settlers have committed horrible crimes against Palestinians and they find their safety niche in Jewish communities. Unfortunately, we hear of it in the context of Muslims. I will say this. Does it surprise me if, in fact, a Muslim or two Muslims had been in this area for the last month or two or three or four? Well, given the fact that it's alleged that a plane was taken from Dulles, or I assume it was, given the fact that there are tens of thousands of Muslims around here and tens of thousands of Irish men and women and Jewish and Italians, it doesn't come as a surprise. I suspect, interestingly enough, there was a story today that 4 or 5 or 6 of these devout Muslims who recently had been going to a co-ed health club and working out in the gym with other women were not necessarily living in this area, but we're living among Jews and Italians and Irish. So we've got to be careful again not to get sort of pigeon-toed into looking at the Muslim community different than any other community. With regard to why my client came here, he's free to answer.
I came here pursuing a job opportunity that is consistent with my mission and what I like to do.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cohen, a quick follow-up from earlier. The grant of immunity for the grand jury a couple of years ago, is it your understanding that that continues forward now?
We didn't seek it. We didn't ask for it. In fact, the only ones who can give, quote-unquote, a grant of immunity specifically in the context of an investigation is a grand jury. The question never came up. My client appeared voluntarily, answered all questions, did not invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. By the way, wasn't given his Miranda warnings. He knows them well, and I was there. He appeared freely, as in his words to them, as a good American and a good Muslim to help in the investigation of this dastardly crime.
Mr. Cohen, could you tell us where yesterday's...
I'm sorry, this young lady.
About solidarity efforts, can you tell us, how many lawyers are going to be out there, how your networks are, if Muslims have already contacted you in terms of how they should proceed and how you see this as sort of a national issue.
As I said earlier, this is a newly established entity. We are in touch with several attorneys across the nation, trying to put together at this point a network and offer legal assistance and comfort assistance to those who want it. We are in the process of coming up with this body to help and assist, and also at the same time not to forget our duty and obligation to assist the law enforcement entities to pursue whatever they want to pursue in a legal fashion, and this case speaks for itself. Bushnaq, B-U-S-H-N-A-Q.
I have one more question.
One second. I was...
And who attended?
It was at the, apparently there is a separate appeals unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, and we appeared with U.S. prosecutors.
One second, please. I was interviewed yesterday by the FBI as being somebody who works with the community, and they asked me the specific question about the Islamic Center and the masajid and so on. And I was adamant about saying that we don't have this kind of people come and row in our Islamic centers and masajid, because we have people like Imam, al-Hallak. I don't know how many of you did, but in my mosque in Dar al-Hijrah, last Friday, the sermons was so good that we have been doing this for the last 10 years. I mean, this is a community that has been going for the last decade on this one, since the World Trade Center 1. So our community is really insulated from this kind of people. I wouldn't say that they don't come and pray, but the community is so on the alert that if anybody comes and talks about any of these crimes, they will be reported right away. So my advice to government authorities, these people will not be in the Islamic Center. They won't come to us. They have their hideouts, and yes, they might hide among us, but they won't be able to come and do this in the Islamic Center. And if any authority, FBI or otherwise, wants to come and talk in our community, to our community, they can come through our supervisors. District supervisors, they know the community very well. And we will try and help them do their job, but not into coming this way by going to Islamic centers or by calling people cold. My neighbor at work, who they visited a year ago, and they know, and they booked a year ago. They know where he is, they know his job, they know whatever he does. But 10 o'clock yesterday or before yesterday, they go to his home, flash their badges to his wife, and they say they want to talk to him. She had to call him from his job, and he said, okay, and he went there and he said, guys, why do you do this? You know where I am. Come and talk to me where I am. But this habit of the FBI of terrorizing the community, it won't help. And I think this is damaging to them and to their efforts.
Mr. Cohen, can I just ask you along that same road, what do you think, or how do you think you could help, or the Imam can help specifically this investigation? Is there any way?
You need to ask the government that. It's like trying to rebut a negative. We've answered questions. In fact, a little anecdote. There was a question that was asked of my client that he didn't know the answer to. So I made a note on my pad, and at the end of the meeting, we made a phone call and got the answer and said, here it is. We've answered every question that's been asked. Any document they may have, which we don't have any, but anything they want, they'll get. The instructions from my client are, we must do everything we can in our power to work with, to further this investigation with prosecutors or the grand jury. One last aside, in terms of what Brother Alamoudi said. I had a call from a very highly respected, influential Muslim figure, a leader in the community, that the FBI had called him and said they wanted to come by and speak with him. And he asked about what, and they sort of said, oh, things. It's, the things. So he called me, and so I called the FBI. And I said to him, well, what do you want to speak to him about? He said, well, we'd like to know about your community. We'd like to know about how people that aren't from your community can get into your community. We'd like to know about how your community functions. So I said this to my client, my client, in view of the general nature of the questions and in view of what's been going on at mosques, said, no, I will not talk to them. So I got back on the phone with the agent, and I said, well, my client is not going to talk to you about anything, in view of, and I registered what his concerns were. And the FBI agent told me the following. He said, well, your leader, as if there's, the one grand leader in the Muslim community as opposed to every other community, met with the Attorney General and promised that all Muslims would help. You're not helping, so I'm going to put in the report we send to the Attorney General of the United States that you're not cooperating. How's that sound, folks?
I'm not a lawyer, and I might take another approach to this. Maybe I'm naive. But I'll tell you how they can come to us. We're fed up with a good cop and a bad cop. FBI leaders, Mr. Mueller, the president, meeting with some of us and saying the good things. And the others come on the other side and do the other things. We approached the FBI 3-4 years ago to come and have a town hall meeting with our community. Come and introduce yourself, talk to people around. When we are in a group, people will talk. Yesterday we asked people after a prayer and we said, how many of you were visited by the FBI? And then we took back, we said, we're sorry, we should not ask that question. How many of you knows who was visited by the FBI? So we can help if they come through the right door, but we will not allow anybody to go to an individual, take him on the side, and then entrap him into saying things that he doesn't know. Some of the difficult things that we face in this community is when you see the pictures. Here you have a terrorized young Indonesian kid who's 19 years old, coming here to do his studies and work in a pizza place or so on, flashing this kind of photos with this kind of names he never heard in his whole world. Arabic names, they might sound alike, but these are all other names that he can't. If they would have come through the community, we want to help the United States, we want to help our government, but they should have to come to us in a better way and better approach.
Let me...
Yeah, we'll give an opportunity.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Complain to the U.S. Attorney at all about the way the FBI had handled this case and this situation, and did they respond? What was their response?
Well, preliminarily, I sent a letter to the Assistant U.S. Attorney in Texas last week detailing why we have not come forward at that point. Right. Although, and I know Mr. Fitzgerald, I've known him for a long time, I did specifically, at the end of our discussion yesterday, indicate that one of the real problems with the investigation is this onslaught directed at the Islamic or the Muslim community. And I in particular brought up the issue about the mosques that have been visited with pictures, et cetera, and Mr. Kelly, who was an associate of his, was there and said, we're aware of it and we're dealing with it. So I mean, let's see what they do with it. But they are aware of these complaints.
Yaser, you want to say something? Then Mahdi.
Yeah, about the recent experiences that we have with the FBI. Again, I call them very intrusive tactics and non-professional. Recently, the FBI, and maybe after they listened to us last Tuesday, now they come in a team, and the first one introduce himself to an individual as an FBI agent working with the hate crime division. So I am here just to listen to your concerns, learn about any hate crime related incidents that happened to you, happened to your colleagues, with all of this nice introduction, and immediately after the person would allow him to speak to them, the other gentleman will move in and say, well, we are from the task force and we would like you to answer these questions. Incidents also, an incident that has reported to us, FBI agent, were invited inside the house of a gentleman who said, yeah, I don't mind, speaking to you. And they answered question and this and that. And they ended up picking up papers, documents, phone numbers from his living room. And the gentleman at that point, of course, he didn't know about his rights. He didn't know how to behave and how to act. He thought that this is legal. And those gentlemen just, left the house with all of these documents, papers, numbers, and so forth, without any search warrants.
Just very quickly, another glowing example of what we call just an inappropriate tactic. I mean, certainly the ability to investigate is an important thing that one needs to do, but just an inappropriate tactic for our community was yesterday when we met with Senator Kennedy, a chaplain from the university, a Muslim chaplain, informed the senator that students were being not visited during their periods and where they were in their dorms or in their residency, but actually the FBI showing up in classrooms, taking them out of classrooms, you know, and asking to talk with them. That's a form of harassment. It is. It's a form of harassment, and as Abdurahman said, it's the old good cop, bad cop thing. And I just think that, you know, in the new millennium, we need to develop some new tactics in terms of dealing with how we deal with things like of that nature. And certainly, we need to have a better attitude in terms of how you deal with the Muslim community. Thank you.
Can you tell us specifically where that happened with the students?
It was Georgetown University.
At Georgetown?
Yeah, one more exciting story. Here comes an FBI agent. He flashes his back to you and he says, I'm an FBI agent. Sign this. The gentleman signed, and boom, they stormed into his house. This happened. And we have who. So this is what we don't appreciate they do to us. Any more questions?
Why don't people know what their rights are?
Huh?
Did that happen here?
That's what
Happened here in Northern Virginia. Well, frankly, they know their rights, but there are many who come, there is an influx of people who come and go, and they don't know, but most of them know their rights. But there are some in our community, and this is our fear, who get those kind of FBI's come to them, and out of sheer fear, they wouldn't come out and talk to the leaders of the community. So we are really very apprehensive on what's going on where. What we're telling you is what is being reported, and more is coming.
Let me just add one thing. I think that there are large numbers of people who, while they know their rights, given the climate of what's going on in this country now, they're afraid to exercise them because their fear is if they say no, they'll be suspected of being terrorists or being uncooperative or worse yet, un-American.
I have a question for the Imam, please.
You didn't tell us your name. I know.
My name is Street Pastor Nick. I'm with the LA Times.
Thank you.
The president has said that Osama bin Laden is a prime suspect in this case. I was wondering what you thought about his description of Mr. bin Laden, and also if you think that if someone has a tie to Osama bin Laden in the United States, is that something that should be conveyed to federal authorities of any kind?
Well, look, he'll answer the first question, but you see the problem is in the definition of tie. Is this someone who has received, who's gone to a library and read the biography of Osama bin Laden a tie? Is someone, I mean, he literally sends tens of thousands of faxes all over the world. Is someone who has picked up a fax and read it a tie? Is someone who has gone to a demonstration where his picture has been displayed a tie? So it's impossible for my client to say, it's an answer that defies, it's a question that defies an answer. With regard to his attitude pertaining to Osama bin Laden, he can answer it himself.
I don't know bin Laden. I don't know what he did.
Right.
I don't know what he did not do. But all what I know that, and I know that there are certain accusations and certain horrible crimes that are attributed to him. All what I say that these accusations need to be proven in a court of law, and justice need to be established.
Have you ever met him?
I don't know bin Laden. I never met him.
Yes.
In 1999, a press account said that Pat Fitzgerald had said that your client was served as a contact between members of the bin Laden organization. Now, however that is, does that, first of all, can you speak to that? Second of all, does that make talking with Mr. Fitzgerald any more difficult?
Well, no. First of all, Lord knows on more than one occasion in the heat of battle in a courtroom or in a press conference, I can spew rhetoric with the best of litigators. You know, Pat Fitzgerald, during the course of a heated moment, when someone, Wahid al-Hajj, his lawyer, had asked, you know, he was basically denied access to his wife, his kids, and he had made the request, can I call the mosque to speak to my community? And Pat, as a great trial attorney, just jumped and ranted and raved and screamed and said, no, 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 you can't do it. And at one point he said yes. He said that Motaz al-Hallak was a conduit between persons who knew of or were affiliated with. Well, that's Pat. Pat could say what he wants to say. Those questions were fleshed out fully during the course of the grand jury. not established, not proven. I could spend 2 hours telling you what led to that rhetoric, but the bottom line was, you know, as I say, I've said certain things in the courtroom in the heat of battle that sound nice, that sound sexy, and are very effective in terms of jurors and judges, but don't always have the full ring of reality. And that's a tough admission on my part.
Okay, any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll get you, I'll give you all the names and the spellings. Thank you for coming.
So, let me just get my brief.
Just have all your